We're back with some breaking news. One of the leading Democrats on the Hill is now calling on President Biden to drop out of the race. In an exclusive statement to the LA Times, California Congressman and Senate candidate Adam Schiff says he believes it is time for Biden to pass the torch and secure his legacy of leadership by allowing another Democrat to beat Trump. That new call comes just as NBC News learns that the president has had enough with the questions about his mental acuity and whether he should stay in the race, as he privately conveys the conversations about his future being over. A senior Biden aide says, "They tell us they've got a good plan to fight through this, but that fight is coming up against brand new polling from the Associated Press that shows nearly two-thirds of Democrats want Biden to withdraw from the race." NBC's Mike Memoli is reporting from Las Vegas. Also with us, Eugene Daniels, political White House correspondent and an MSNBC political contributor. Mike, as Biden's patience wears thin, we're learning his inner circle is shrinking, and now we're hearing yet another member of Congress is saying it's time for him to drop out. Put all of that in perspective for us.
Well, this new call from Adam Schiff, who, of course, is running for the Senate in California, is significant for a number of reasons. He's one of the most strongest fundraisers in the party, also very close with the former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. So he can be seen as sort of a bellwether for what other senior Democrats might also be thinking. And as part of this comprehensive snapshot of Biden's thinking at the moment, led by Carol Lee and Monica Alba, we unpack a number of things, including the frustration on the part of the president that's been becoming more evident as he's been reaching out to members, especially in these different House caucuses. At first, these calls were largely conciliatory, the president acknowledging his poor debate performance and asking for and getting some feedback. But that feedback has become more blunt, more direct as those calls have continued. And the president, as we understand it, was responding in kind during some of the calls that took place last weekend. Now, we're also learning that the president is relying increasingly on he has a large circle of advisors that's grown since he's reached the White House. But in this moment of sort of political crisis, he's leaning especially heavily on those who've been with him the longest, people like Steve Ricchetti, Mike Donilon, who've guided him since his days as vice president. You heard some of the president's energy, some of his fight during the conference he spoke at here in Las Vegas yesterday to the NAACP, even invoking biblical verses. Let's take a listen to what the president said here yesterday.
I've been young and now I'm old. Yet I have not seen the righteous forsaken. I have not seen the righteous forsaken. And I will not see the righteous forsaken. Hopefully, with age, I've demonstrated a little bit of wisdom.
That tone of defiance from the president as he is speaking here in Las Vegas to some of what the campaign calls the backbones of the Democratic Party and of Biden's coalition. Black voters yesterday, Latino voters today here at the Unidos conference. We expect over 1,500 people in attendance. On the day after we saw at the RNC, quite a focus on illegal immigration. The president going to be speaking to an important Latino audience here in Vegas, Chris.
So, Eugene, this is big news about Adam Schiff, right? For any number of reasons, because he represents a lot of those folks who are in really tough races. He won a hard-fought primary. Now he's in a very hard-fought general election race. But also, there is a lot of questions. Would the Democrats wait a while after the assassination attempt to go back to this call? Would they wait until the end of the Republican National Convention? Clearly, at least for Adam Schiff, the answer is no. I wonder whether this is going to open the door for others. Where do you think this whole process that Joe Biden says isn't going to go anywhere stands right now to get him to step down?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's so important to remember and it's just really zero in on about Adam Schiff is that he is so close to former Speaker Nancy Pelosi. And we know, we've reported in Politico Playbook and others have followed as well, is that she has been taking phone calls and talking to members of Congress, especially frontliners, about what they should do and about her own concerns about the possibility of President Biden staying in and tanking not only his own race, right, but also having a down ballot impact. And so it's really important when you think about Adam Schiff doing this, what people are going to take from this, members of Congress who haven't publicly said anything but feel the same thing Adam Schiff is talking about today, is that Nancy Pelosi has endorsed this, right? That this is a wink and a nod from one of the Nancy Pelosi allies that we can all say what we want to say. I will say if they were waiting, they are continuing to run out of time, right? And this is something that Biden folks, when you talk to them, they talk about the time that it would take for this to actually kick off. And they are right. There wasn't really a plan when members of Congress came back after that really terrible debate performance that President Biden did. They came into town and thought they'd just have some meetings secretly and that we wouldn't find out those meetings, that they would be able to do this in private. That's not been the case. And so if they're going to want to do this, they're going to have to do it faster. But the key to this is they're going to have to convince President Biden and that small inner circle that Mike is talking about to do it. They are his delegates at this point. And, there's no evidence that they could kick him off, right? They'd have to somehow convince the delegates to vote their conscience. That's the clause in the DNC rules that they not vote for him on the first ballot whenever that actually is, even though they're supposed to. And so all of the mechanics of actually doing that are going to have to also strongly include President Biden himself signing off on whatever they want to do, and him also probably wanting to choose a successor to this as well, right? He has his own legacy to think about here and how much time there is in this race overall.
So many moving parts. Mike Memley and Eugene Daniels, thanks for helping us get up to speed.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn. MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.